Hey there, Coach Amy coming back to you on the second part of reading labels. Let's look at the part where it says nutrition facts. We'll cover the serving size, fats, carbohydrates, fiber, and proteins. Let's tackle these one at a time, starting with the serving size. The serving size is the recommended portion of the food to be eaten. For example, the label may say the food has 2.5 servings. If we eat the entire food, we just consumed 2.5 servings of that food instead of the single serving size. So essentially, that food should last for 2.5 separate servings. For example, if the label says there are 3 grams of saturated fat and you eat the whole package, which is 2.5 servings, you just consumed 7.5 grams of saturated fat in one sitting. Speaking of fats, total fat is made up of saturated fat, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, and trans fat. Beware of the labels that say fat-free. Many fat-free foods may have added sugar, which is essentially stored as fat. And it's probably more than you should have anyway in order to lose weight or trim your waist. A good rule of thumb when looking at fat is keeping it less than 5 grams, except for the good and healthy fats. And some of these healthy fats are foods like salmon, avocado, nuts, natural nut butters, and olive oil. So if you're looking for a bottle of olive oil, for example, perhaps your bottle says 1 tablespoon is 14 grams of fat. Well, since the olive oil is a good and healthy fat, you should go ahead and have the entire tablespoon. But remember, just because you're able to eat the entire 14 grams of fat in the olive oil doesn't mean you can eat 14 grams of fat from junk food. This also does not mean that if 1 tablespoon is healthy, then 2 or 3 must be healthier. 1 serving of olive oil 2 times a day is plenty. More than that could sabotage fat loss efforts because remember, you're getting fat from other sources as well during the day. It's important to consider the collective amount of fat consumed in one day. We aren't teaching you to count calories or macronutrients here because it isn't necessary to make eating healthy harder than it is. If you're looking for a detailed plan of how many fat grams or carbs you should consume in order to achieve a certain performance goal, you should seek personal nutrition advice. But in the case of learning how to choose healthier options and trim the waistline in the process, counting points or calories is not necessary. Next is carbohydrates. The total carbohydrates are made up of fiber, sugar, and of course the complex carbohydrates like breads, cereals, potatoes, and some rice, to name a few. And also listed under the carbohydrates section may be sugar alcohols and glycerin. The fiber and sugar are listed separately as an ingredient of the total carbohydrates, so it's easier to determine where most of the carbohydrates in the food are coming from. For example, if the total carbohydrates are 18 grams and the fiber is 10 grams, you know that most of those carbohydrates are coming from fiber. You may hear something called net carbs or impact carbs. These net or impact carbs of a food are not always listed on the label, but they're easy to determine based on the information given on the label. In order to calculate these carbs, you simply take the total carbohydrates and subtract the fiber, sugar alcohols, and glycerin. This will give you the impact carbs of the food. In other words, this will let you know how much of the carbohydrates you eat will impact the blood sugar levels. Ideally, you want to have the net carbs that you're eating to be in a single digit. So 0 to 9 would be optimal. 10 or more would be high. It's also important to remember that not all food brands will list the sugar, alcohols, or glycerin on the label. Also keep in mind that most grain foods will rarely result in single net carbohydrate values. Many of the carbs in foods like breads, pasta, potatoes, rice, dried beans, and other grains can slow weight loss, even if they have a great source of fiber. If you're on a plan that allows you to eat low GI starches or grains, remember to consume only single serving sizes. For instance, if you're going to eat quinoa, remember that 1/4 cup is a serving size. Next, let's look at fiber. It's important that you're getting enough fiber. So make sure that the food you eat has at least 5 grams of fiber per serving. Unfortunately, if you're a typical American, you may get 10 grams of fiber daily if you're lucky. 25 to 35 grams or more of fiber is what's recommended. Not only does fiber promote regularity, it lowers the risk of developing many life-threatening diseases and conditions like heart disease, certain cancers, diabetes, stroke, and obesity. There are 2 types of fiber, soluble and insoluble. Both soluble and insoluble fiber are indigestible and they are not absorbed into the bloodstream. Instead of being used for energy, fiber is excreted from our bodies. So there's a reason we don't need to eat a big bowl of fiber before we go to exercise. It just leaves the body and doesn't provide us with any energy. The soluble fiber forms a gel when mixed with liquid and typically is found in fruits, vegetables, dried beans, and peas. Insoluble fiber is gritty and passes through our intestines largely intact. Insoluble fiber accounts for 70% of the fiber in our diets and is found in whole grains, couscous, cucumbers, celery, and other foods. No matter what your meal plan is, you should get at least 5 grams of fiber in a single serving. To help you visualize this better, if you add 2 cups of fresh vegetables to each meal and 1 or 2 cups of berries each day, you'll likely get the fiber you need. Then, last but not least, is the review of protein. Protein is important for metabolism and building lean muscle mass, which burns fat. In general, 4 to 6 ounces of protein per serving for women is recommended at least 3 times a day, and then for men, 6 to 8 ounces of protein is recommended per serving. In order to get these quantities of protein in your diet, it's important that you pay attention to the grams of protein listed on the label. 7 grams of protein will equal about 1 ounce of protein. Let's say an egg white has 3 grams of protein and a whole egg has 7 grams of protein. In order to meet your protein requirement for breakfast, which should be about 4 to 8 ounces depending on if you're male or female, you would have to eat at least 1 whole egg and 4 egg whites, which would be 19 grams of protein. But most of the time, especially when it comes to lean pieces of meat, fish, or chicken, you can keep it simple by holding out your hand, palm up. Your palm is a great measurement of a single serving of protein. Don't forget the side width of your palm also. Some good lean sources of protein are chicken breast, ground turkey breast, grass-fed beef, egg whites, Greek yogurt, cottage cheese, tuna, and salmon. Remember to refer to your foods list if you get stumped. There are also many other plant-based sources of protein, such as beans, legumes, quinoa, amaranth, sprouted lentils, spirulina, and hemp. And some other examples are things like nuts, which are also healthy fats, and beans, which are also low glycemic starches. If you can eat a serving size of protein every time you eat, your body will stay satisfied longer, preserve lean muscle mass, and keep your metabolism fired up and burn more calories. If you're working out, and if you're watching this, you are certain to be on a good exercise program. You should know that the muscle you're working so hard for must be preserved by eating protein. Remember, your muscle is your metabolism. You'll also notice that we skipped over cholesterol and sodium on the labels. And it's not because they're not important, but when you're eating and following these basic guidelines, you'll find that the foods you're choosing are low in cholesterol and sodium anyway. Typically, sodium or salt is not the enemy. High amounts of sodium are mostly found in unhealthy, processed, canned foods or foods that require preserving. Unless your doctor tells you to restrict the sodium or cholesterol in your food, following labels in the ways we discussed is very effective. Whew, that was a lot of information. Are you ready for your test? Just kidding. Let's quickly review some ways of keeping it simple when reviewing your labels. A simple rule of thumb to follow when choosing from a label, look for these things. 5 grams of sugar or less per serving, except in natural dairy products. 5 grams of fiber or more per serving, and 5 grams of protein or more per serving. Now you know better, so it's time to do better. Time to go shopping and put your newfound knowledge to the test. I'll see you back for the next lesson.